Well, earlier I spoke to the Environment Secretary, Sophy Ridge. Let's have a listen. Hello, great to have you on the programme.
Good to be here
today.
Sophie.
Well, it's been a busy day. Thousands of protesters coming to Westminster. Did you manage to get out and meet them?
I did meet some farmers who came in. I spent 2 hours in front of a select committee, but I spoke to some farmers before I went into that. Of course I did. And, you know, I can understand why people are worried about change, but the point I was making to these farmers is this is a government that is backing British farming. Despite the very difficult circumstances of the budget, we allocated £5 billion over the next 2 years for farming. That's the biggest ever budget in the country's history for sustainable farming. Now, on the changes that we're making to inheritance tax, that is in the context of a £22 billion black hole in the public finances that we've had to fill. And also we've had to fund our public services that are on their knees, services like the NHS that farmers use. Now, in order to do that, we've had to ask the wealthiest individuals and the very largest farms to pay their fair share. But if you look at the numbers about who will be affected, and this is the key point, the Treasury numbers taken from HMRC, validated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, show that no more than 500 farms would be affected in any year. The vast majority of farmers or claimants at the point of death would pay nothing.
I want to talk in depth about the figures in a moment, because I feel like this is kind of the crux of the argument, if you like. But before I do, I just want to play you a clip of what Jeremy Clarkson, obviously the face of the protest, if you like, told my colleague Sarah Jane Meat a little earlier. I think you can just have a listen.
What do you want to say to the government about what's happening to farmers with the inheritance tax?
Back down.
Keep moving, please.
Back down.
Keep moving.
You know, if you make a mistake, we all do, and they have, be big enough to say, we made a mistake here, and then back down.
Are you going to back down?
Well, I love Jeremy Clarkson's show, but I think he's listening to the wrong data here. If the vast majority of farmers are not affected, only 500 according to this data, and that's based on the last year for which we had actual hard data for claims.
Because
it shows that 3/4 of claimants will pay nothing.
So I went and I spoke to farmers, and I put that to them today when I went out to meet some farmers on the protest, and they said, look, if you look at DEFRA's own figures, they say 2/3 of farms are worth over £1 million, so they will be impacted by this. They basically think you've just swallowed the Treasury line.
But the calculation doesn't work like that, because more than one person can own a farm and they each get a £1 million threshold, plus if they're a couple, the million that they can pass on to their children. For many people, that's £3 million already, without taking into account other allowances like capital rollover allowances
a lot of people
that would be available
pass it to
to
their
them.
Partner and then pass it to their children afterwards.
But you
you're
plan,
asking people
don't you? You tax plan and you make sure that you reduce your liability. So many people will get. Many people.
A lot of people.
Businesses do that.
Can I just? Because I think this is also quite interesting. You know, a lot of people would say, you know, asking people to find ways to avoid paying tax is not what the government should be doing.
It's not avoiding it.
A lot of people don't have
It's
tax
succession planning that any business would do, and any business has an accountant. Farms are businesses; they have accountants as well. But as I was saying, in many cases they'll get £3 million tax-free anyway. So it will only be the bigger farms and the wealthiest individuals that will be paying this. But even when they pay it, they're paying half the rate of inheritance tax that anyone else would have to pay. And instead of paying it all at once, like any other taxpayer, they'll have 10 years to phase it over. That's still a very good deal for some of our wealthiest landowners and biggest farms. Now,
do you think the farmers just don't really understand this policy?
I think the farmers have been told things that have alarmed them. Part of my job is to show them why the figures that we are using are reliable. Now, what we've done is we've got those figures based on hard data, actual claims on point of death from the last year that those figures were available. It's been validated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent IFS financial think tank. They're all saying exactly the same thing.
So you effectively know farm by farm almost who would be liable to this.
Well,
could you publish that data? So then people would, because there is a lot of alarm and fear.
Yeah, no.
Are you thinking about publishing the data so people can...
That data is available. It's available on the DEFRA website.
But what I mean is, like, so you can check to see if you are one of the farms. You know, if you've got, you know, 462
You can't publish it to that level
farms.
of detail because circumstances will change. How many people own the farm, what other capital allowances they're entitled to, whether they have a mortgage, the type of other property that they own. It varies from circumstance to circumstance.
You're saying 500. It's pretty specific, isn't it?
But that's based on the data for an entire year that would have had all of that complexity within it, rolled forwards, and then that gives you the 500 figure. But as I'm saying, it's not just HMRC and the Treasury. The OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility, have independently verified it, so have the IFS.
Have you done any contingency planning about what would happen if farmers did sell up or leave the industry as a result of this, and whether it could affect the food supply?
Well, they won't be selling up and leaving the industry,
but
because the vast
question
majority of them won't be affected.
Have you done any contingency planning?
Well, the vast majority won't be affected, so that won't be happening.
So is that no, you haven't done, or?
Well, there's no need. If most of them aren't going to be affected, why would they be leaving the industry? Last year, the majority of agricultural land that came up for sale went to non-farmers. And we think a lot of that is people, very wealthy individuals from non-farming backgrounds, buying up agricultural land because they know that that way they can avoid their own inheritance tax liability. Now, that was not what this scheme was originally put together for. By dealing with it, we get a fair contribution from the very wealthiest and biggest farms, but we can also stop wealthy individuals from outside farming buying up land and escalating the prices that lock younger farmers out of the dream of owning their own farm.
So you're doing this partly because it's the right thing to do? Not
it's the
just
right
because
thing
of
to
the
do,
money.
but I think it helps farmers as well. And in the context of a government that, despite all of the difficult financial inheritance, has allocated £5 billion to back farming over the next 2 years, trying to negotiate a new deal to get British food exports moving across the channel again, this is a government on farmers' side.